There's a trader you might know. Maybe you've seen them in Discord groups or Twitter threads. Maybe you are them. They laugh at things that shouldn't be funny. A violent red candle that takes out half their position. A stop-loss hit at the worst possible moment. Even an account going to zero, again. They laugh, not because they've stopped caring, not because money doesn't matter anymore, but because something inside them has been rewired through fire. They've gone through too many account blow-ups, and that changes you in ways most people will never understand. When I say blow up, I'm not talking about a bad day where you lose a few percent. I'm talking about the kind of moment that splits your life into before and after. The moment where you watch your account drain in real time, your hands shaking, your heart pounding so hard you can feel it in your throat, and your mind goes completely blank. You sit there frozen, staring at numbers that represent months of work, savings you shouldn't have risked, hopes you built too high, all vanishing in minutes. And in that moment, everything you believed about yourself collapses. The story you told yourself about being disciplined, about being smart enough, about being different from all the other traders who blew up, it all shatters. And you're left sitting in the wreckage, trying to understand how you got here. Picture this scene, because if you've traded long enough, you've lived it. A candle spikes hard against your position. You know you should cut it. You know you should have cut it 3 candles ago. But you don't. You watch. You hope. You pray to a market that doesn't care about prayers. And somewhere inside, there's this strange quiet. No more cursing. No more blaming the broker, the news, the whales. Your brain has already moved past anger into something colder. You start thinking clearly, almost clinically. Maybe I sized too big. Maybe I wasn't focused enough today. Maybe I'm carrying too much emotional baggage from yesterday's loss. When you've survived enough of these moments, the panic changes shape. It doesn't disappear. It just becomes something you recognize, like an old enemy you've learned to live with. Here's what nobody tells you about traders who have gone through too many account blow-ups. Their brains don't work the same way anymore. They're not broken, at least not in the way you might think. They've been trained. Not by a course or a mentor, but by pure survival. Their nervous systems learned to recognize danger faster than other traders. They developed an instinct for when something feels wrong, even if they can't explain why. They stopped believing in excitement, because excitement got them killed too many times. They learned to doubt their own confidence, because confidence was the mask their ego wore right before disaster. The problem is the market doesn't always reward this kind of hypervigilance. Sometimes the best trades require a leap of faith these traders can no longer take. Their survival instincts scream danger at moments when they should be pressing the gas. And beneath all that caution, beneath the calm exterior they show the world, something strange is happening. These traders develop what looks almost like immunity to chaos. Not immunity to losing money, that still hurts. But immunity to being completely destroyed by it. They've learned through brutal repetition that blowing an account doesn't actually kill them. The shame passes. The regret fades. Life continues. And from that realization, everything shifts. They stop treating each trade like life or death because they've already died and come back too many times to count. This should make them reckless, but it doesn't. Instead, it makes them careful in a different way. Careful about protecting something more valuable than money. Their peace of mind. Their ability to sleep at night. Their relationship with themselves. You would think someone who has blown up many times would become bitter. Angry at the market, angry at themselves, closed off to other traders. But often, the opposite happens. They become some of the most empathetic people in the trading world. They can read another trader's emotional state within seconds. Just from hearing you describe a losing trade, they know exactly where your head is. A slight hesitation in your voice, they know you're afraid to pull the trigger again. Too much excitement when you talk about a setup. They know you're about to overtrade. They don't need to see your chart. They're reading something deeper. The temperature of your emotions, the cadence of your confidence. The small cracks in your voice that signal you're about to make the same mistakes they made. They learned this language the hard way, by speaking it fluently in their own moments of desperation. And here's something beautiful that emerges from all that pain. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth. After you burn deep enough, you don't just recover, you transform. Your relationship with money becomes clearer because you've seen how quickly it can disappear. Your relationship with risk becomes humbler because you've learned that you're never as smart as you think you are. Your relationship with yourself becomes painfully, brutally honest because you can't lie to yourself anymore when you've watched yourself make the same mistakes over and over. These traders start to appreciate things they once dismissed. A trading session where they took no trades because nothing met their criteria. A day where they shut down the screen exactly when they planned to, even though price kept moving. A week where they didn't break their rules once. These small victories, these moments of restraint, bring them a sense of relief that big wins used to bring, because they've learned that protecting themselves from themselves is harder and more valuable than catching any trade. But there's a dark side that lives alongside this growth. Traders who have gone through too many account blow-ups often exist in a state of permanent hypervigilance. Their danger detection system never fully shuts off. They always have backup plans. Always think 3 steps ahead to the worst-case scenario. Always prepare mentally for the moment when everything collapses again. Not because they're pessimistic, but because their nervous system was trained in an environment where survival meant expecting disaster. They can't just trade a setup anymore. They have to map out every way it could go wrong, every scenario where they could lose control, every edge case that could blow them up again. This makes them safer traders, but it also exhausts them in ways people don't see. And here's the most ironic part. These traders almost always downplay what they've been through. If you ask them about their losses, they shrug. It wasn't that bad. Other people have lost way more. Losses are just part of trading, no big deal. They've developed an allergic reaction to being seen as victims because they survived by telling themselves they were fine. Admitting they're still struggling, still carrying those scars, feels like another failure. So they hide it behind jokes, behind that laugh you hear when something goes wrong, behind a mask of casual indifference that makes it look like nothing touches them. But if you pay attention, if you watch closely, you'll see the moments when that mask slips. When a trade goes badly, and their jaw tightens just a fraction. When someone asks them about their worst loss and their eyes go somewhere else for a second before they smile and change the subject. There's a strange paradox that lives inside traders who have gone through too many blow-ups. They can be eerily calm when their account drops 30% in a single session. They'll close their laptop, take a breath, go for a walk, come back later without panic. But put them in front of a slightly wider spread than usual, a half-second delay in their execution, a moment where they forgot to place their stop loss exactly where their plan said, and their entire internal system vibrates with tension. Why? Because they've learned a brutal truth that most traders never fully grasp. The big things in trading are usually outside your control. News events you didn't see coming. Liquidity that dries up at the worst moment. Flash crashes that hunt your stop before reversing. Market sessions that go completely insane for no logical reason. They used to believe they could control all of it, and that belief cost them everything. So their brains gradually let go of trying to control the uncontrollable. But in exchange, they grip the small things with white knuckles. Position size, entry precision, stop-loss placement, how they write in their journal, how they sit at their desk. These microscopic details become their lifeline in a world where they've lost everything too many times. That's why you'll see something that confuses people who haven't been through it. These traders remain completely composed when the market violently reverses against them, but they'll fall into an internal crisis because they entered 2 candles earlier than their plan specified. That's not weakness. That's not being fragile. That's a nervous system that learned to survive through precision, through control of the controllable, through building tiny islands of certainty in an ocean of chaos. And the contradiction goes deeper. These traders both crave control and have accepted helplessness at the same time. They know, clearly and completely, that no trade is guaranteed. They know the market can do anything at any moment. They know their analysis could be perfect and still wrong. But every time they prepare to enter a trade, they still want just a little more certainty. One more signal. One more confirmation. One more pullback to a better level. And then the trade runs without them. Or they enter late, chasing. Or they miss it completely. And afterwards comes that familiar feeling, the self-blame, the doubt, the question that's haunted them through every blow. Am I even suited for this anymore? This creates a loop that can last for years. Blow up too many times, develop fear of being wrong. Fear of being wrong leads to seeking too much confirmation. Too much confirmation means poor entries or missed opportunities. Poor entries create losses. Losses reinforce the belief that I'm still not good enough. And the loop continues tightening, even when the trader already has the knowledge and experience to succeed. They're not missing information. They're fighting their own history, their own nervous system, their own body's memory of pain. There's something else that rarely gets talked about. Traders who have gone through too many blow-ups develop a complicated relationship with self-belief. They don't have loud confidence anymore. You'll never hear them say, "This trade is guaranteed," or post screenshots flexing their P&L. But they also don't fully trust themselves. They trust the system. They trust statistics over time. They trust probability in the long run. But when it's time to click the button, when it's time to put their money where their analysis is, that trust wavers. Not because they don't understand the setup, not because they can't read the chart, but because they remember. They remember the times they understood perfectly and still got destroyed. They remember the feeling of absolute confidence followed by watching their account free fall. That memory doesn't live in their thoughts. It lives deeper, in their body, in their heartbeat, in their breathing, in the slight tightening in their chest when price approaches their entry level. You can't logic your way out of that kind of memory. It has to be slowly, carefully rewired over time, and because of this body-level memory, many traders start to detach from emotion in an extreme way. They become cold, mechanical, clinical. It's just probability. Don't feel anything. Emotion is the enemy. It sounds right. It sounds logical. It sounds like what a professional should do. But here's the problem. Emotion doesn't disappear just because you tell it to. It doesn't vanish because you deny it. It only changes form. It turns into background tension that lives in your shoulders, into long-term exhaustion that makes every trading session feel like pushing a boulder uphill, into unexplained boredom with trading, where you open your charts and feel nothing, not excitement, not fear, just numbness. And that numbness is its own kind of death. Then something happens that few traders have the courage to admit out loud. After too many blow-ups, you don't just lose money. You lose a version of yourself. The version that was excited to open charts every morning. The version that believed the market would reward hard work and dedication. The version that had hope, real hope, not just the desperate kind you use to get through another losing week. That version is gone. And nobody holds a funeral for it. Nobody acknowledges the loss. You're supposed to just move on, learn from it, become better. But how do you become better when you can't even remember who you were before all this pain? The traders who stay in the market after multiple blow-ups become more realistic, more mature, more grounded. But they also become heavier. Trading is no longer fun. It's no longer a path to freedom or excitement. They trade because they don't know where else to put all this experience, all this knowledge they paid for with their savings and their peace of mind. They trade because stopping would mean admitting that all those blow-ups were for nothing. And right here, a question starts to form in the quiet moments. Am I trading for my future, or am I just trying to prove that my past losses weren't meaningless? That question has no easy answer. But it's the question that determines everything that comes next, because there's a moment that most traders who have gone through too many blow-ups eventually reach. It's not dramatic. It's not when the account hits zero. It's a very ordinary morning. You open your charts. You watch the market move. You see a valid setup. And suddenly, you don't want to take the trade. Not because you're afraid. Not because the setup is bad. But because of a feeling you can't quite name. Emptiness. Like you've been walking through a war for so long that you've forgotten what you're fighting for. This is the turning point. And at this turning point, traders usually take one of two paths. The first path is becoming a tired survivor. They stay in the market. They still open charts every day. They still analyze, still place trades. But there's no real belief underneath. They trade like a machine that's slowly breaking down. They don't expect to win big, but they can't let themselves stop. Each trade is just something to get through. Each session is just surviving until they can close the screen. They're not afraid of big losses anymore because they've been numb to catastrophe for so long. But they also feel nothing when they win. Trading becomes a mental obligation, a way to avoid facing the fact that they've invested too much time, too much money, too much of their identity to walk away now. They don't burn violently anymore. But they don't move forward either. They're stuck in limbo, surviving but not living, continuing but not growing. And the most dangerous part is that from the outside, they look perfectly fine. No FOMO. No revenge trading. No emotional outbursts. But inside is a quiet exhaustion, a heaviness that comes from convincing themselves every day that, if I just keep going, it'll eventually work out. The second path is the one very few have the courage to take. It's the path of redefining who you are. Traders who take this path don't try to go back to their old version. They don't try to trade like they did before. They don't try to recapture that initial excitement and hope. They accept that the old version is dead. And that acceptance is painful because that version was innocent, trusting, believed that effort and dedication would make the market fair. But they understand something crucial. If they try to resurrect that dead version, they'll just keep burning. So they do something completely different. They simplify everything. Fewer setups. Fewer time frames. Fewer trades. Not because they've gotten worse at trading, but because they understand their nervous system can no longer tolerate unnecessary complexity. They stop asking, how do I make more money? And start asking, how do I stop destroying myself? That shift in question changes everything. They start building trading systems that don't just fit the market, but fit who they are now. Not who they wish they were. Not who they used to be. Who they actually are after all the trauma, all the losses, all the versions of themselves they've buried. They accept that they can't handle deep drawdowns anymore. They accept that they can't hold trades through major volatility. They accept that they can't trade multiple sessions in a row without breaking down mentally. And instead of trying to force themselves to be stronger, tougher, more resilient, they design systems where they don't have to be. This is where most people misunderstand what evolution means in trading. They think it means becoming colder, more robotic, more emotionless. No. True evolution is when you no longer have to brace yourself. When your system carries the load your nervous system can't handle anymore. These evolved traders don't try to control their emotions in the heat of the moment. They remove the situations where destructive emotions have a chance to appear in the first place. They don't ask, how do I stop being afraid? They ask, how do I design my trading so I never have to feel that fear? And here, something profound shifts. Trading stops being a place to prove themselves. It's no longer a battle between them and the market, them and their past, them and every trader who's doing better. Trading becomes an environment carefully designed for long-term survival. They're not chasing the feeling of being right anymore. They're chasing sustainability, the ability to keep doing this for years without breaking. And strangely, it's when they let go of the need to win that they stop losing. Not because their win rate gets higher, but because they stop pushing themselves into situations they can't emotionally endure. They stop taking trades that look perfect on paper, but feel wrong in their body. They start honoring their limits instead of fighting them. Evolution doesn't erase the pain of all those blow-ups. It just changes how that pain exists inside you. It becomes softer, quieter, integrated into who you are rather than something you're constantly trying to escape or overcome. And this brings us to something that almost no one talks about. The grief. Every trader who has gone through too many blow-ups carries a specific kind of grief that has no name in our culture. It's not grief over lost money. Money comes and goes, and after enough time, you realize it's just numbers. The grief is for a version of yourself that you can't get back. Traders who've blown up multiple times rarely cry over their account balance anymore. They cry, usually when they're alone, because they're no longer who they used to be. The version that entered the market with bright eyes and genuine excitement. The version that believed learning enough and working hard enough would be sufficient. The version that could look at a chart without carrying the weight of every past mistake. That version disappeared somewhere between all those blow-ups, and nobody acknowledges that loss. There's no funeral for that version of yourself. No moment where you're allowed to say goodbye. No cultural recognition that you've lost something irreplaceable. So the grief stays quiet, unspoken, lingering in the background of everything you do. You still open charts, still analyze, still trade. But somewhere in your chest lives this different feeling. Caution that never fully relaxes. Tightness that doesn't quite release. A readiness for disappointment that's always humming in the background. Traders who have gone through too many blow-ups are rarely surprised anymore. Not because they can predict the market better, but because they've learned to expect nothing, to hope for nothing, to protect themselves by assuming things will probably go wrong. This keeps them alive in the market, but it costs them something precious. Lightness. The ability to be present with possibility without immediately calculating all the ways it could hurt them. You can hear this shift clearly in how they talk about trading. They no longer say, "When I win." They say, "If I don't lose too much." They no longer ask, "How do I get rich from this?" They ask, "How do I make sure I don't mess up again?" Their entire language changes because their identity has fundamentally changed. And this is perhaps the most painful part. Traders who have gone through too many blow-ups often miss a version of themselves whose face they can barely remember anymore. A version that could enter a trade without bracing for impact. A version that could lose money without feeling stupid. A version that could be wrong without it meaning something terrible about their worth as a person. How do you explain that you're homesick for a home that only exists in memory? How do you tell someone you miss yourself, but you can't go back? This is where many traders get completely stuck. They no longer fit who they used to be. But they haven't built a new identity yet. They exist in between, no longer naive enough to be reckless, but not yet at peace with what they've become. And in this in-between space, many start blaming themselves. Maybe I'm just too weak for this. Maybe I was never cut out for trading. Maybe I should have quit years ago. But that blame is the wrong diagnosis. This grief isn't a sign of failure. It's a sign that you've changed too much to fit back into your old skin. And if you can allow yourself to look directly at that grief, if you can stop running from it or trying to trade your way past it, something different becomes possible. That grief begins to shape you into someone deeper, someone quieter, someone who notices things other traders miss, because you've learned to pay attention to the spaces between the action. You stop believing in secret formulas and guaranteed strategies, because you've seen too many of them fail. You stop believing the market owes you anything, because you've learned it never did. You start valuing things you once dismissed as boring or unproductive. Peace. Stability. The ability to walk away from your desk without your chest tight with anxiety. A trading session where you took no trades because nothing met your standards. A day where you stopped when you said you would, even though your mind wanted to keep going. A week without any major emotional swings or discipline breaks. These become achievements. Not because you've lowered your standards, but because you've learned what actually matters when you're trying to survive in this market long term. And maybe this is where the transformation truly completes. When trading stops being the place you go to feel alive, and becomes the place where you learn to live with yourself more sustainably, more honestly, more gently. After all the blow-ups, after all the pain and grief and versions of yourself you've lost, The most important question isn't, how much money did I lose? It's, what kind of person did I become by staying? Because not everyone who blows up multiple times has the courage to face themselves and continue. Most people leave the market not because their losses were too big, but because they couldn't tolerate no longer being who they used to be. The identity shift is harder than the financial loss. But the traders who stay, who go through the fire and keep going, they're changed in ways that matter. They no longer seek validation from the market. They don't need winning trades to feel worthy. They don't use their P&L to measure their value as a person. They no longer ask, am I right? They ask, am I still being honest with myself? They understand something that only comes from paying real prices. Strength in trading isn't about never falling apart. It's about how many times you can reassemble yourself after falling apart, even knowing that some pieces will never fit the same way again. Even knowing you'll never be who you were before. And from that understanding, a quiet wisdom forms. Traders who have gone through too many blow-ups are usually not loud. They don't brag. They don't try to prove anything to anyone. But they have something rare. They know their limits, truly know them, not just intellectually, but in their bones. They know when to stop. When to shut the screen. When a winning trade isn't worth what it would cost their mental stability. They know that protecting their nervous system, protecting their ability to think clearly and act rationally, is as important as protecting their account balance. They don't see refusing to trade as weakness anymore. They see it as a higher form of discipline, the discipline of knowing yourself well enough to walk away. And there's something beautiful that emerges from all this pain, something few people notice. These traders' pain transforms into compassion. They don't mock beginners anymore. They don't laugh at people making obvious mistakes. They don't judge FOMO or revenge trading or over-leveraging because they remember being there. They remember hurting like that. They remember believing just one more trade would fix everything. When a new trader comes to them panicking about a loss, they don't give tough love or tell them to toughen up. They just listen. Because they know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone in pain is the understanding that they're not alone in it. These traders become the kind of people who make you feel safer just by being in the room. Not because they have all the answers, but because they don't pretend life or trading is simple. They know beautiful and brutal can exist in the same moment. They've lived it, and beneath everything, there's still a gentle sadness. A sadness for the version of themselves that was lighter, more hopeful, believed things would be fair if they just tried hard enough. But that sadness doesn't break them anymore. It softens them, slows them down, makes them move through the world with more intention, more presence, more awareness of what actually matters. If you're hearing these words and seeing yourself in them, know this. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not lost forever. You're simply someone who has been through too much. And your nervous system is still learning how to exist in a world where the threats aren't as constant as they once were. But the memory of those threats remains vivid and real. And maybe that's the real psychology here, the heart of what happens to people who have gone through too many account blow-ups. They're not just survivors. They develop a subtle, hard-earned understanding of what it means to be human in an environment that doesn't care about your humanity. They learn that winning isn't everything. That sometimes just not losing more is already an achievement worth honoring. That protecting your peace is more valuable than any trade. And if you watch long enough, you'll see them scattered throughout the trading world like quiet lighthouses. Not bright because they're perfect or successful in ways everyone recognizes. Bright because they remember the dark. They've been in the deepest darkness the market can offer, the darkness of watching everything you built disappear, of facing yourself at your worst, of losing versions of yourself you loved. And they came back, not unchanged, not unscathed, but here, still opening charts, still learning, still trying to exist in this space with more honesty and gentleness toward themselves. So the next time you meet a trader who seems too calm in chaos, too steady when everyone else is panicking, too quick to laugh at their own pain. Understand this. That calm was purchased with multiple account blow-ups. Every boundary they maintain, every time they choose not to trade when they easily could, every moment of unexpected depth in how they talk about the market, all of it comes from the fact that they've been through too much to ever take trading lightly again. And somehow, despite everything, they're still here, still trying, still learning how to live with themselves more gently in a world that showed them no gentleness at all.